Welcome to the most diverse career development platform available. This platform is based on quality and educational excellence. This is a platform for high achievers. Hello everyone. With a great degree of honor and personal pleasure, I want to introduce Mr. Brady Pyle. Mr. Pyle is the current Vice President of Human Resources at Space Center Houston in the US. He's been a prior Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer for NASA, which he joined in 1995, responsible for leading all human resources within NASA. He has been recruiting/hiring for some of the world's most demanding roles. This includes also astronauts. He has also served as a key partner in modifying NASA's 60-year decentralized HR service delivery model. He has received numerous awards. Most recently, in 2018, he was a recipient of NASA's Outstanding Leadership Medal. And he's also extremely passionate about leadership and transferring his experience to the younger generations and people who need that help. In 2014, for that reason, he founded Out of This World Leadership platform, which is basically a consulting firm offering keynote talks, workshops, seminars, and coaching to people who want to develop personally and professionally. Now, this interview acts basically as the blueprint of Mr. Pyle's professional journey and contributions towards shaping the HR and leadership culture within NASA. We also touched up on required decision matrices in order to lead senior executive teams and good HR practices in general. And we also touched up on the privatization of space and the introduction of the new players, such as SpaceX and Blue Origin. Now, apart from Mr. Pyle's outstanding achievements and incredible impact within NASA, which is one of the world's most demanding and most high-performance organizations, I want to focus on Mr. Pyle's character, qualities, and virtues. I believe that through me, he's talking to thousands of other students and aspiring professionals who really want to understand the mechanisms behind leadership and good HR practices on an elite level. I believe that this interview should act as a reference point, and its service goes beyond just being published and existing in a platform. I believe the information in this interview is invaluable. Sharing your professional experience and spreading awareness, educating on the highest level other people is equally as important as having immeasurable impact within your specialized role. And I hope that you are able to see the value in these 40 minutes in the same capacity that I was able to do. The interview will be published on the 27th of April.
I mean, you have extensive experience in recruitment and HRA practices within some of the most demanding and difficult roles within NASA. So, but I would like to take you back though. I would like to take you back in 1995/96 when you finished your master's and you entered NASA. Can you talk to me about NASA's HR culture 28 years ago and how you honed your skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly a journey back in time. But one of the things that impressed me about NASA when I was in graduate school was how, as a government agency, they were looking at best practices in HR at the time.
Mhm.
And there's a book that was used, Dave Ulrich's Human Resources Champions
Okay.
book, that they use to really describe the role of human resources, and having 4 different roles: being a administrative expert, being an employee champion, being a change agent, and then also being a strategic partner. And those roles were really driven in the mindset of the team and in the approach of HR at the time. And HR also really heavily focused on relationships with customers, making sure that we had good working relationships with our customers, that we understood the business, so we could really devise the right HR strategies and approaches to meet NASA's aggressive mission. But I would say one of the things that really impressed me most was how we were trying to stay with state-of-the-art HR from an industry perspective. NASA never has compared itself with other government agencies. We've tended to want to kind of push those boundaries with industry.
I assume since the space industry has become more privatized as years go by and other companies come in to steal the part of the pie, that these policies and practices have changed a little bit in the past 28 years.
Yeah, and let me clarify a little bit
Yeah.
there, George, because when the space shuttle program was ending, NASA really faced a strategic choice. And at the time, they were thinking about what was called the Constellation program. So they were going to build kind of their own sets of rockets and spacecraft to go back to the moon and onto Mars. Through a series of deliberations and decisions, ultimately, um, the administration, presidential administration, and Congress decided, hey, we really need to kind of split this business a little bit. We need to have private industry take astronauts up and down to the space station, and then we need to put more dollars into creating and stimulating private space industry. And that decision that was made probably 13, 15 years ago, has really stimulated this private space industry that we see today. So the SpaceX, led by Elon Musk, Blue Origin by Jeff Bezos, those companies are really growing and expanding the space economy. So what that's done for us, for NASA, from a workforce strategy perspective, is one, we're trying to build kind of the pipeline of students going into STEM, because there's going to be greater demand for engineering and science positions, not only at NASA, but just across the aerospace industry. And that's the role an organization I moved to. It's an organization called Space Center Houston that is dedicated to really education and outreach to inspire students to pursue STEM careers and STEM fields. So we're excited about that. The other piece that NASA has done, I think, to continue to adjust, is trying to figure out how to have porous borders between NASA and space industry, how workforce can kind of travel in and out of industry back into government roles. A lot of the SpaceX roles, for example, they've got aggressive schedules, aggressive timelines. So people are working a lot of hours and very aggressive schedules. And that tends to work well for younger workforce before families come to play, or kids come to play. And then NASA tends to be a little bit more work-life friendly in that regard. So, we're trying to figure out a strategy where we can leverage workforce across industry and government.
The absorption of personnel outside the realm of the space industry, that's very, very difficult to do, as you know, and polishing it out I think that's a great initiative coming from a young person who is viewing the space industry together with all of the other students as something that I go into because I have high stress tolerance because I'm young. And then when I get out, basically I don't. I will stay there until I retire, and then that's the
Yeah.
end of it. So refining and polishing this, your initiative is crucial that you're taking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we need talent at different stages from an asset perspective, and need folks to continue to contribute to
Mhm.
the goals. NASA tends to set the strategy, and then a lot of the space partners then kind of play into that strategy.
Where I also want to place a focus on, because you mentioned a budget. Now, budget is a key word because in order to induce change within a program, there is a lot of logistical difficulties, such as the executive board persuasion, which is like these are like saturated, standardized terms. But if we talk about modifying NASA's HR service, which you did in 2018, can you take me through the motions of actually doing it and the
Yeah,
adversity you met?
great question, George. Yeah, so probably for 60 years pre 2018, NASA had a very decentralized HR operation. What that means is we have 10 locations or field centers across the United States. Field centers like the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where we launch the rockets. We have the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we train the astronauts, and that's where mission control is. Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama that kind of builds the rockets, and then multiple other science and research locations around the country. And prior to 2018, and for 60 years, the HR operations at each of those centers were independent, and they
Mhm.
they supported the local center director, and continue to operate and provide support to the mission that way. In 2018, NASA made the decision. They said, "Hey, we are going to need to save money from a mission support perspective," because at that time, NASA's budgets were flat. They weren't going to grow with costs of inflation. So for us to continue to produce space hardware, to contract with companies that help us get to space, those costs are growing. So we had to create a wedge from the mission support side, um, in order to meet the missions and the requirements that NASA had. So they made the decision in 2018 that, hey, instead of 10 independent support organizations from an HR perspective, from a procurement perspective, finance, all the support functions would be managed functionally. So HR in 2018 became a one function across NASA.
Mhm.
My role at that time, I was the HR director at the Johnson Space Center, and I became director of HR services over all of the NASA centers, and working with them on how we standardize service delivery, because we were taking budget cuts. Our budget was cut um, close to 15-20%. Our workforce was cut a little deeper than that because of the cost of living and inflation that we faced. Workforce over the 5 years that I was in those roles at NASA was cut somewhere between 20 and 25%.
Mhm.
So it was challenging to continue to meet customer requirements, in light of the budget, because what was happening for the rest of NASA is those flat budgets actually um, became increasing budgets. Senator Nelson, who's the NASA administrator, was able to secure some higher level budgets for some of our programs and projects. So the workforce grew from about 17,000 to about 18,000, so about 1,000 employees during the time we were taking reductions of 20 to 25%. So it created a
Mhm.
very challenging environment for HR.
And your service delivery expanded massively, I would say. And I think this dives into the leadership element, which you are
Mhm.
very, very heavy on, and rightfully so, because it's incredibly important. Can you talk to me about the leadership style within NASA that you've experienced?
Yeah, so when I started at NASA in the mid 1990s, um, a lot of the style and approach was very hierarchical and very top down. Um,
Mhm.
so leadership kind of made decisions and made announcements, and then the rest of the organization, um, kind of went along. What we found over time is that as different generations entered the workforce, and like my generation, Generation X, entered the workforce, and then we had Generation Z after that. Um, we had to move to more of a coaching type leadership culture.
Mhm.
So our leadership skills that we really emphasized were around coaching, and coaching skills are where we encourage leaders to ask more questions. Um, so what's really hard at NASA is, and I think this is true of a lot of technical organizations, you tend to get promoted into leadership roles because you were very good technical expert. You knew the technical business and the technical details, and so you get promoted into leadership. And encouraging those leaders to shift their mindset to ask more questions than have answers is very challenging. But if they don't do that, what we found was the team was not as creative or innovative and not as engaged. If the leader is always giving the answers, the team shuts down. If the leader creates an environment where they discover the answers together, there's greater engagement, creativity, and innovation. So that was a shift over time, and a lot of our leadership development really focused on
Mhm.
that. And I think that's been a very successful transition at NASA. Of course, you still have pockets of leaders that have different styles and different approaches that don't sync up with that, but that was the approach that we took.
And I think you took it a step further, we can say. You've characteristically said that I want to spread leadership wherever I go.
Yes.
So I want you to talk to me about founding the Out of This World Leadership in 2014. How did this happen?
Yeah. So around that time in my career, I was the deputy HR director, which was right before the kind of the executive ranks. The HR directors were executive roles, and the deputy was not. And I had been in that role about 3 years and was kind of at a career crossroads because it wasn't clear if I was going to be able to move into that executive position or not. My predecessor in that role was a very strong leader, and she wasn't that much older than I was. So,
Mhm.
wasn't on the verge of retiring or moving to something different. So I began to look at different career options, and started to explore different things. Well, I ran across a resource by a guy named Alan Collins, who has a website called Success in HR,
Mhm.
and he encouraged HR leaders to have a blog, and get their name out there, and into the blogosphere, if you will. And prior to that, I had always been passionate about leadership development, and so I had taken a bunch of notes on books I'd read about leadership, observations about leadership, and so it really resonated with me when he talked about the blog, that I could blog about leadership. Well, I also have passion around Christian leadership. So I looked at the branding for my blog being Out of This World Leadership, which kind of combines the idea of NASA and Christian leadership as well. And so I've used that blog the last 10 years. It's almost more of a personal journal for me of
Mhm.
my leadership learnings, my spiritual growth, and kind of how I'm growing, not only as a leader, but husband, father, and the different roles that I play in life. So I've primarily, like I said, used that as a journal to continue to kind of grow and develop myself. It keeps me accountable to continue learning and growing,
Mhm.
which is what I love to do. If you're familiar with the Strengths Finder
Yes.
book, I'm both a learner and achiever. So this blog has really helped on the learning side of things.
I like what you're saying very, very much because I can fully resonate.
Mhm.
Because the website that I've created is an extension of myself, basically.
Yeah.
It makes it ever so effortless when you are treating your blog or a side hustle per se as
Hmm.
an extension of your character because you don't feel as if you're putting in work that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I also want you to talk to me about the recruitment practice in NASA.
Yeah.
So, leaving aside the part that these people, especially astronauts, they are people of high intellect and extreme measurable achievements, what else do you seek when you recruit these individuals?
Yeah. So um, astronauts or anyone, we have a high culture of teamwork across NASA.
Mhm.
And when we talk about teamwork, we talk about the full range of team and everyone who's involved at NASA. So one of the things I like to talk about that happens in astronaut selection, for example, is we ask everyone who was involved in having interactions with the candidates, uh, receptionists at the desk, nurses who are involved in some of their medical work, um, different people who had interactions that aren't an obvious part of the interview process. We get their opinions and perspectives about interacting with the astronauts, and in many cases, some of the smartest people, um, people who have interviewed very well in the interview panels, get screened out because of those interactions. And the reason for that is one, yeah, we've got the culture of teamwork at NASA, but two, a lot of what you're looking for in that selection process is they're looking for people that they can fly in space with. And when you're flying in space, you're in tight quarters,
Mhm.
and people's under stress behaviors. You know, how do you operate? How do you deal with other people? And if you're treating people of different status differently, that's going to show up, in space. You're going to be, if you're a jerk to people, on the ground, you're going to be a jerk to people in space. And so teamwork is a huge screening item for astronauts. We also have astronauts involved throughout that selection process of asking the question, can I fly with this person? Are they, when you're talking about space station missions that last a year, when you're selecting people now, you could be talking longer duration in space and in relatively tight quarters. So um, that's a huge selection element for us, and that trickles down not just for astronauts, but that's throughout our hiring process when we're bringing students in through a intern program.
Mhm.
We look a lot at their communication skills, their teamwork skills, how will they work with others.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is a fellowship program that's for international students who accepts
Yes.
10 per year, if I'm not mistaken.
There are different programs. I
Yeah, I
know,
think
yeah,
there's
some
different
some of
programs.
them do that, but there are multiple different programs that are run across NASA
Mhm.
with that. But yeah, the intern.nasa.gov tends to give a good front door for information about that.
Mhm. I also want to talk, we touched up a little bit previously about colliding interests because of privatization of the space industry in
Mhm.
2023. And I want to focus specifically on HR practices between these organizations. So if you'd say that you are competent within NASA in HR practices,
Mhm.
which would be the critical point that you would focus on in comparison?
Yeah, so NASA needs really good, I would say, internal management consultants. So you need
Okay.
good analytical skills to look at information about what to focus on from an organization development perspective. You need great communication skills, writing, presenting, uh, one-on-one discussions, group discussions. Those are the kinds of things we look for. The Some of the differences from an HR perspective between NASA and private industry. Um, NASA is still heavily regulated, so our job classification and pay process was established in the 1950s.
Mhm.
It's a process that's used by other government agencies like the Social Security Administration, the IRS, and so NASA HR professionals have to be very creative in how they apply the rules and their knowledge to accomplish the mission at NASA. Where private space industry, you get a lot more leeway in your compensation practices. Your recruitment and hiring is less regulated as well, and so NASA tries to we try to do what we can to keep pace with with industry in those regards. But it's a lot of times it's a lot of creative work to figure out how to work within the system to accomplish the mission.
And I want to see also how that creative work shifted to your role now as Vice President of Human Resources for the Houston Space Center. So, how do you channel 26 years of experience into, or 28, I would say, to a brand new role?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm in week 3 on the roll. One of the things that I noticed pretty quickly and that I talked to the leaders here about was they really wanted kind of more in the realm of leadership development
Mhm.
for their leaders here and people who are new to the roles that they have. And so NASA has used a framework that was produced by the Center for Creative Leadership a number of years ago. It's called the 70-20-10 framework for development. And it says 70% of your development is through on the job experiences and um, kind of the context of the job. 20% is learning comes from people. So the context that you have, those are things like mentoring and coaching. And then 10% is the actual kind of training content. So typical classes that you would think about or other education opportunities. I saw when I arrived here, there really wasn't much infrastructure or opportunity around that 20%, around the mentoring and coaching. So we actually have a meeting next week to talk about bringing a coaching program here, and then also initiating a cross-departmental mentoring, because this organization is looking to grow over time, and our management team is going to have to work together and do
Mhm.
some of the teamwork that I talked about that NASA does so well.
Mentoring and coaching, I mean, everyone is talking about it. Everyone is seeking for the perfect mentor nowadays. The information is again very saturated, and everyone is seeking for that element of advice that will distinguish them from someone else.
Right.
So, how would you believe that a student, an undergraduate for that matter, should seek a mentor?
Yeah. So, and let me say too that I firmly believe there's not a single perfect mentor. I've been
Mhm.
shaped by multiple mentors over the years, and um, when I'm in front of groups of leaders, I ask them who's on your Mount Rushmore of leaders. So Mount Rushmore is a national monument here with 4 former presidents, um, and you should be able to quickly think about people who've impacted you and provided that guidance to you as as a student, and actually as an early career person. If I go back to the mid
Mhm.
90s that we talked about earlier, one of the things I did is I looked out and I saw leaders that I admired and respected, and I approached them. I remember approaching one leader very early at NASA and said, "Hey, I appreciate the way you operate and the way you lead." I said, "I would like to have a mentoring relationship," and he looked at me like I had a third eye. He said, he goes, I don't know what mentoring is," and I said, "Well, why don't we just go to lunch and get to know one another, and then I can ask you questions and kind of get your experience." So he was intimidated by using the word mentoring, and when he said, "I don't think I'm the right person to mentor you," I said, "I think that makes you the exact person I need to talk to." He was a very, very humble leader. He was a very quiet leader, and that was one of the things that I was wrestling with coming out of school. Is I'm more of an introverted leader, and a
Mhm.
lot of the examples of leadership and people you would see being very dynamic or very extroverted, outspoken, and so I sought out leaders who were effective as quiet leaders, um, and kind of looked for mentoring from them. How did
Mm.
they influence in the system? Because sometimes it's harder for introverts to get their voices heard in meetings when extroverts are being a little bit more vocal, a little bit more loud. Um, but yeah, that's what I would suggest is looking out you know, whose approach, whose style um, do you appreciate, and go tell them that and ask if you can, have coffee, go to lunch with them, just get to know them a little bit, and then build relationships that way. What I try to do too is keep those relationships for 6 to 9 months and then rotate to other relationships. So
Mhm.
intentionally building a network as well. And then being in part of the organization, looking at parts of the organization I didn't know as well, and trying to seek out mentors that way, to kind of build up that network and those relationships.
That rotation that you mentioned is, I think that's very important because, especially as fresh industry professionals, we get hung up on a single person that we aspire to become.
Yeah.
This is what you did basically. You were looking for someone who has the same frame of mind.
Hmm.
So you thought, okay, I want to be in this person's shoes one day. Let me approach them. And I can see like the leadership element within you because you were bold enough to go up to them and do it. Um, how feasible is it today to go up to senior leader and ask them to be mentored though?
So I can't speak for all organizations. I
Yes,
I
yeah.
know I know at NASA that
Hmm.
the senior leaders are more than welcome to sit down with people and talk with them and share their ideas. And I think most leaders are that way. I think also it's important to think about levels of leadership that you would approach. I think as a I looked at that time at the first manager I approached, for example, was um, I was within a branch. He was a division chief, so
Hmm.
he wasn't a director, which was kind of the senior leadership at the center. He wasn't the center director. We have had some young people enter the system. They want to be mentored by the center director. That's the position I want, and I want to, and that's harder because their time is harder to get. Um, it's not that they're not open to that, but if everyone is seeking mentorship from them, so finding people in the system that are a step or two removed from you, within, if you're in a large organization, that are step or two removed from you, or um, just being mindful of that, of not always going to the very top person, I think
Hmm.
is key in that decision process as well.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely important to go up to people who are actually doing the job.
Right.
Because managing people is one thing. Actually being deep into a role and asking for information is another. So I think that even a person with 5 years of experience on a specific thing could mentor you potentially. But there
Right.
is, yeah, absolutely. So, Mr. Pyle, I want to thank you for allocating your valuable time to talk to me, educate me, and motivate the students who will see this. As I said, it really means a lot to me. And
Well,
I think this
thank you.
interview, no worries.
Yeah, thank you, George, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
No worries, my pleasure. And I think this interview is a testament that of the approachability of senior leaders, and it's going to serve good. These are the students who will see this. There's no way it won't. It's invaluable advice.
Yeah, thank you, George.
No worries. Have a beautiful day, Mr. Pyle. Thank you. Bye.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.